Hello and welcome to Topic 4, Lecture 1. And this week we're going to be learning about understanding crime and victimization. So sometimes when we hear about a crime being committed, we might ask ourselves, like, why did that person commit that crime? And that's what the chapter this week has to it deals with. It offers several theories of helping us understand why people commit crimes. So I thought to get us thinking about that, I would use a case from Wisconsin that happened in 2018 that got a lot of media attention, both within Wisconsin and beyond. And so you might remember Jake Patterson. That's the individual in the photo there. Jake Patterson abducted the teenager, the 13-year-old Jamie Klaus, from her home in Barron, Wisconsin in 2018. That when he abducted her, he killed both of her parents, and then he took Klaus to his cabin and kept her there captive for about 88 days. And a lot of people wondered, well, why Jamie Klaus? Why did he choose her? And it just sounded like it was sort of random in a way. He said that he had seen her getting off of a bus one day, the school bus, and that he decided that was the girl he wanted to take. He had attempted the week before, but he changed his mind because of activity in the house, and he didn't want to get caught. He didn't want any witnesses. And then when he was captured, he confessed to the abduction and the murders. And he pled guilty, and he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences, no parole. So that's what happened to Jake Patterson. And so when we think about that crime, we might say, well, why did he do it? Did he have a mental illness of some sort? Well, it's possible that, maybe he didn't understand the consequences of his actions. However, the fact that he attempted to abduct her and then said he didn't want any witnesses, I mean, even if he did have mental illness, he at least understood the consequences that, hey, he wanted to capture her at a time when there were no witnesses so he wouldn't get caught. Maybe he has some sort of neurological disorder. Maybe he lacked the capacity to have empathy, right? Maybe he had some impulse control issues. Was it a rational choice? I mean, as I just mentioned, he saw her, he followed her, he waited till an opportune time to take her. So that seems sort of rational. Maybe, he was lonely, wanted somebody at his cabin. Well, a product of bad parenting, some sort of social disconnection that he was responding to, whatever, right? But all of those are sort of efforts to say, why did this person do this horrible crime? And this chapter is going to help us look at some of the theories that criminologists have come up with to help us understand that question. So your textbook offers many theories of criminal behavior, and in lecture we're going to focus on 3 of those. And so in this lecture we're going to focus on choice theory, or the rational choice theory of why people commit crimes. We're going to be looking at the trait theory, so we're going to do that in this lecture. In your textbook, they talk about psychological theories for why people commit crimes, sociological theories, and that's what we're going to look at in lecture 2, and then critical and developmental theories, okay? So you are responsible for understanding all of those theories. There will be questions on the quiz regarding those theories and on the midterm as well, but we're going to focus on those 3 in lecture. So the first theory that we're going to learn about is what is known as choice theory. And the theory about why people commit crimes is that they do it because they want to do it. And so one prominent view of criminality is that people choose to commit crimes. In other words, criminals, like most people, are rational, and that they engage in a cost-benefit analysis. And so that if the perceived cost of committing the crime is more than the perceived benefits, then they don't engage in criminal activity. Now, you'll note that this theory of why people commit crimes dovetails really nice with, or couples with, the crime control perspective that we talked about in last week's lecture. And so, the crime control perspective is, really that, people are thinking about committing crimes. They're rational actors. They're looking at how the community and the society responds to criminals. And if they respond to them harshly, then they won't engage in the crime. But if they don't really respond harshly, then they're like, I'm going to take my chances because I'm going to get a benefit from engaging in that crime. Okay. And so from their perspective, criminals are just like anybody else. They're able to engage in a cost-benefit analysis, and that when people decide to commit the crime, it's because they think the benefits are greater than the costs associated with committing that crime. Okay, so to get us to think about the choice theory of why people commit crimes and how criminals engage in a rational calculus as they decide whether to commit a crime, I've invited my husband Mike here to assist in the lecture, in this portion of the lecture. Because if we were in a class together, I would pick on one of the students, one of y'all, and I'd say, hey, which of these two scenarios would you choose to commit a crime in, so that we could sort of look at how rational calculus takes place in the mind of criminals or the mind of anyone. But since we're not in a classroom together, I thought I would invite my husband, Mike. Hey, Mike, how's it going today?
Pretty good.
You excited about the Brewers winning the division champs, that they're the division champs?
I sure am.
We're very excited. You can note I'm wearing my Brewers jersey today, or outfit today. All right, so Mike, so if crime is a rational action, right, and that criminals are engaging in a rational calculus, here's two scenarios, okay? Let's look at each of these scenarios, and then you tell me if you were going to burglarize one of these homes, which would you choose and why? Okay, so let's look at the scenarios first. So in scenario one, it's 1 p.m. in the afternoon. The house that the criminal is thinking about burglarizing is a large, well-constructed home in an expensive neighborhood. There's no bushes in the front yard, but there's a barking dog in the front window and the lights are on. In scenario two, it's 10 p.m. in the evening. It's a smaller home in a less affluent neighborhood. There are bushes and fences surrounding the house. There's also quick access away from the house. You can run away into the alley. There are no lights on, and there's no dog. Okay, so Mike, you're the criminal. You're the burglar. Which of these two houses are you going to burglarize? Engage in a cost-benefit analysis there.
Well, I think in scenario one, the rewards are greater because it's in a wealthier neighborhood, so I would think they have nicer things, maybe jewelry, things like that I could take.
Right.
I think in the less affluent neighborhood, maybe they have nicer things in the house, but it's hard to tell.
Right.
I think you're kind of judging things on the neighborhood. I think also maybe one of the risks, though, in the scenario two, I think those risks are less, though, because of the easy access to the valley and the lights aren't on and there's no dogs. So maybe that's an easier place to rob, right?
Right. They're sleeping. You could kind of get in and get out real quick with you wouldn't get detected. Right.
So I think in the scenario one, the reward is greater, but the risk is also greater with the no bushes and the barking dog and the lights are on. It's in the afternoon, though. Maybe people aren't home, right? 10 p.m. in the evening, people are probably home.
Right. So let's call the question, which one are you going to go with, scenario one or scenario two?
I would probably go with scenario one.
Okay, great. And with scenario one, why?
Because the risks are greater, or the risks are greater. The rewards are also greater too.
Excellent.
And I think the risks are manageable, right?
Excellent. So, well, thanks, Mike.
Okay.
You're a rational actor.
Thank you.
So, from the choice theory, that the takeaway is that the actions are based on an evaluation of information. And so those thinking about engaging in a criminal action are basing their decision to act or not to act on evaluating information. They might ask themselves, how frequently is this crime reported to police? And if it is reported, what's the likelihood of me getting apprehended? Does this have a low clearance rate? What are the potential profits? So you sort of saw that with my husband, sort of saying, look, there are risks to, doing scenario one, but the benefits are great, right? You could get jewelry and things like that. So what are the potential profits? And you could also say, what are the range of punishments that are caught? Again, it goes back to that crime control idea. That if it's just a slap on the wrist, right, you might be like, heck, I'm going to go for it, okay? And so your textbook talks about that there's a wide range of crimes that are considered rational. And so that it could be something as like sort of more obvious kind of rational crime is sort of like insider trading or some sort of financial crimes, right? Where it seems like the individual involved in that is like get a lot of information and, run a calculus about, the potentiality of getting caught. But they also say that street crimes are also, that there's an indication when you look at the patterns of street crimes that there is a rationality to those as well. Houses that are on cul-de-sac or along alleyways are more likely to be robbed. That oftentimes that crimes take place between 9 and 11 a.m. So again, back to what my husband was saying, daytime, likely they're not going to be home because people are usually at work during that time period. And so, that when you look at patterns of crime, it does seem to correspond with that there is some rationality that's going on. And so that rationality can be, range from white collar crime to organized crime to street crime. It's not just certain types of crimes that seem to be explained by the choice theory. So if crime is a rational act, what's the best approach to preventing crime? Well, if it's a rational act, then you gotta, deal with the rational calculus. That you have to come up with a way of increasing the costs associated with committing the crime, decreasing the benefits, so that if you make it so that it's more costly to commit the crime and that the benefits that you get from it are not very much, then you would hope that would be a way that you could work with the rational calculus to prevent crime. Let's look at some ways that your textbook talks about how to achieve the goal of increasing costs and decreasing benefits. Okay, so if crime is a rational action, then from the choice theory, that the prevention of crime should be rational as well. And so in your textbook, they talk about 3 categories of preventing crime that spring forth from the rational choice theory. One is general deterrence, the other is specific deterrence, and the third one is situational crime prevention. And let's talk about each of these individually. So general deterrence and specific deterrence have the word deterrence in it. So I thought it was important to define that term. And so above the graph there, it says that deterrence is defined as discouraging an action through instilling fear. Okay, so that's what deterrence is. So what's the difference between general deterrence and specific deterrence? Well, general deterrence is a discouraging of action through instilling fear to the general population. Okay, so think back to that James Q. Wilson quote. And it basically said that some of us are evil, you just got to lock them up, throw away the keys. Some of us are angels and innocents and we'll never do anything wrong. But most of us are just sitting around watching and waiting to see how criminals are treated. General deterrence is a message that's being sent to those who are sitting around waiting to decide whether they want to commit a crime. So it's a general message, right? And so that if you're thinking about doing a crime and that you know that you're that you really know that the police force is really good, that everybody has sort of like either closed circuit TV up around in the city or cameras that people have at their doors, right, to monitor, then you might think twice about committing a crime because you are fearing apprehension, right? You think, boy, the cops are really good, they're on the beat all the time, there are cameras everywhere. I fear apprehension, so I'm going to be deterred from committing that crime, even though I haven't committed the crime yet, but I'm going to think twice. I'm not going to engage in it. Also, if you're thinking about committing a crime, should I do it? And you're like, wow, if I do commit this crime, I'm going to get a really stiff penalty, like the death penalty, or like 20 years in prison or something like that, right? So general deterrence is the message that's being sent to those people who are thinking about engaging crime, right? And if you have a higher level of fear of apprehension and a higher fear of punishment because the punishments for that crime are really stiff, then you're going to, again, it works on that rational calculus and the cost is really high, okay? Specific deterrence is the message being sent to somebody who's already committed the crime and you're trying to deter them from committing future crimes, okay? And so specific deterrence is that The person who's committed the crime is getting a really harsh punishment, and so that they're experiencing a long sentence or they're experiencing the harshness of being incarcerated, so that then when they get out again, they'll be deterred from re-offending because they're like, man, I was punished for a really long time and that punishment was not good. Also, if the person is, oh, I didn't think I'd get caught for this crime, but I did, then if I think about reoffending in the future, right, then I'm going to fear that future apprehension, okay? So that's the difference between general deterrence, a message to those who have yet to commit crimes, and specific deterrence, the message that is being sent to those who have already committed crimes, and we don't want them to engage in crimes in the future. Situational crime prevention is a different approach to preventing crime. And they can all be used in tandem, right? Situational crime prevention is increasing the effort needed to commit crime and also reducing the rewards associated with that. So it increases the effort, that's the cost, and reducing the rewards, that's the benefit. And so, for example, an example of increasing the effort to commit a crime, we live in River West, somewhat of a higher crime area, and we always lock our gate. We have a bicycle chain on our gate, right? Because we want to reduce the effort to committing crime. If there's no gate, then they could just walk onto our property. If there is a gate, but that it doesn't have a lock, it's easier to get in. But when you have a lock on your front gate and a lock on your back gate, it's much more difficult to get on our property. And when we added those locks, we've had less incidences of property crime, which we had before we added the locks. People will put, clubs on their car, locking locking the steering wheel. Those are examples of increasing the effort needed to commit crimes. Reducing the rewards is, that if you have your serial number that is on an item that is, like your VCR, or your TV, or whatever, your computer, right? Well, somebody could steal that, but then either there might be a GPS device on it. On Apple products, you can blow up your phone so it makes it unusable, right? Like, not really blow it up, but get rid of the hardware, and then that reduces the rewards because you might have stolen something, but it's easy to track and it's not usable. There are other examples that your textbook uses as well, but these are all approaches that follow from the rational choice theory. So let's think critically about the choice theory and about the role that rationality plays in crime commission. Well, are crimes rational acts? Obviously, there is some evidence to support the claim that criminals are rational actors. However, that it could be a rational act, but that there are times when people commit crimes where there is not the presence or a diminished presence of rationality. For one thing, most crimes are committed under the influence of drugs and alcohol when rational thought is impaired. And we know that because of surveys that we take of offenders. And so we know that offenders oftentimes have a higher rate of being altered at the time that they are committing the crime. We also know that even at a time when we have truth in sentencing and we have longer sentences that were put in place starting in the 1990s as a response to the rise of crime in the United States, we know that many people still offend, even though we have longer sentences. And we're going to be learning more and talking more about this when we read our text, the book for the semester called Locked In. Between 60 and 70% of people reoffend, and that would indicate that specific deterrence is not working. And that even the harshest punishments don't reduce crime. So, for example, that there seems to be no link between the death penalty and reduction of homicide rates. In fact, when we get to the chapter later in the semester, when we look at the death penalty, that immediately following the implementation of the death penalty, when somebody in the state receives the death penalty, rates of violent crime tend to go up. And also that there seems to be no clear link between sex offender registries and people who sex offend, right? And so that when we started sex offending registries, we thought, well, that's a harsh crime. Everybody's going to know that you're a sex offender. But that as we learn, the reason why people commit sex offenses is not a rational act, but there's something else going on in terms of the decision making and their biochemistry, which we'll talk about in a moment. So, is committing a crime a rational act? Maybe criminal acts are not fully a product of choice or free will, but maybe there's other things that are going on as well to help us understand why people commit crimes. And we're going to be exploring that in this week's discussion. You're going to be reading a really cool article called "The Brain on Trial" that looks at the brain and injuries to the brain, tumors and diseases to the brain, drugs that can have an impact on brain chemistry, and the correlation between the health of one's brain and their and whether or not they commit crimes. And so the author David Eagleman, in the article you're going to be reading, "The Brain on Trial," questions this whole notion of free will. He argues that we think that we're making free choices, but it's not as true as we think that it is. That brain biology, brain chemistry, and genes make up a significant role in the choices that we make. And so you'll be reading about these really interesting cases. For example, he talks about this individual, Alex, who for a very long time just had like sort of normal sexual appetites, normal being like that he wanted to have sex with adults, not children. And then there came a point in his life that he was developing these weird sexual appetites for in particular for children. And he started collecting child pornography and making unwanted advances to his stepdaughter, and he was ultimately convicted of child molestation and child pornography. They also talk about how at the same time he was complaining of these horrible headaches, and he went to the ER and they found that there was this giant tumor on his orbital frontal cortex, a part of his brain that has an impact on one's sexual desires. When they removed the tumor, his abnormal sexual desires went away, and when the tumor started growing back, they came back. Okay. And so I think you'll find the article interesting because it really sort of problematizes or thinks critically about the whole idea of crime is rational. It's also a good article because it dovetails nicely into the next theory that we're going to be taking a look at, and that's the trait theories. So the second set of theories we're going to be taking a look at in the lecture is trait theories. And they say that people commit crimes because criminals are physically different. Biocriminologists attempt to link the physical traits or conditions of a person with criminal behavior, with antisocial behavior. And you'll read more in detail about this in the textbook, so this is just sort of an overview. But it involves three broad areas: biochemical factors, and we'll take a look at these each individually, neurological problems, and genetic influences. And so, they basically, biocriminologists that come from this theory, some say that they look at the biochemical factors within a human's body, and that they say when there are certain chemical imbalances that it can cause antisocial or criminal behavior. So, for example, one example is environmental contaminants. And one of the things that we've noted that we know that crime has decreased considerably since the 1990s in the United States. And one of the theories behind that, and you were reading about these sort of theories in your textbook as well. But one of the theories is that that starting in the 1970s, we started removing lead from gasoline and removing lead from paints, and also doing lead paint abatement in older homes. And the thinking is that people, and we test people's blood and the lead level in people's blood, in particular children, and the lead levels are much lower now than they have been in the past. And that, fits into the trait theory because when you have a lot of lead in your blood, it has an impact on your aggressivity, that you're more aggressive, right? You can't control your impulses as much, and that when there's less lead, you have more control over your aggressive actions, and that the aggressivity really diminishes. And so one aspect of this is that environmental contaminants, food and diet, common additives to food, low blood sugar, testosterone, the presence of testosterone hormones, that has an impact on whether people commit crimes, and it's something beyond our control. In a way, right? It's beyond the individual control, but obviously society can reduce like contaminants in our water and in our air. Neurological problems that criminals often suffer from brain impairment. You're going to be reading a lot about that perspective in The Brain on Trial. And so that they use examples about the impairment of neurotransmitters that influence, brain function, and that when you have problems with your neurotransmitters, again, it can lead to aggression and those sorts of things. The presence of dopamine, the presence or the absence of dopamine or serotonin in your body can impact your brain functioning as well. And then your textbook also talks about these genetic influences that they look at. They compare twins that have identical DNA, and that they say that we can see that even when twins are sort of raised in different households, they engage in sort of similar antisocial behaviors. That these delinquency traits can be inherited, etc. Okay, so all of these, again, it's just a brief overview, but all of these are things you'll dig in more deeply in the textbook as we learn more about trait theory. Okay, that's it for lecture 1. In our next lecture, we're going to be taking a look at sociological theories. And there are 2 main branches of sociological theory: social structure theory and social processing theories. So I'll talk to you again soon.